of being women in higher ed and being the first in their roles at Gettysburg College. Ladies, if you would like to introduce yourselves and tell a little bit more about the work that you do at the college and why your work is important.
Sure, who do you want to start?
You can start, Jeanne.
Okay, well, I will start then. So first of all, thank you so much, Chantanique and Monique, for inviting us tonight. This is a really great panel, and I'm so happy to be here with my colleagues, Charmaine and Jeanne. And I applaud, all of you. I think all of you guys who have come to listen to us talk. I'm Jennifer Bloomquist, and I am the Associate Provost for Faculty Development and also the Dean of Social Sciences and Interdisciplinary Studies here at Gettysburg College. I am a faculty member in Africana Studies. I've been at the college for 19 years now. And most of that time was spent in Africana Studies teaching courses in linguistics and in AFMAM studies. And I've been in the Provost office for the past 4 years.
Okay, hello everyone, and thanks of course to Monique and Chantanique. I am very happy to be a part of this panel with my esteemed panelists, Jennifer and Jeanne. It's wonderful. So I am Charmaine Cruz, and I am the Dean of the Office of Academic Advising and Student Support Services. Of course, as you know, I'm very biased because I believe that we are the heartbeat to the college in terms of providing needed services so that we can play a critical role in terms of retention and completion, but we don't do it without those that we partner with throughout the college to help students to be successful. So I've been at the college, I'm actually in my 7th month, and it has been both interesting, entertaining, and educational. And so I'm looking forward to this conversation.
Thanks. Well, I'm going to repeat the same things my colleagues have said. It is good to be here with everybody tonight, with my panelists and with all of you. And thanks to Chantanique and Monique for having us. My name is Jeanne Arnold, and I am the Chief Diversity Officer here at the college. This is the inaugural position, though there were, I think, iterations before that weren't titled this, but I'm the first actual Chief Diversity Officer, and I am a little bit over the 6.5-year mark, so the time has gone quickly. It's a challenge. I'll say that, and we'll get to talk more about why that is in this work, but it is good work, and it is what gets me up in the morning and makes me, want to come either virtually or in person, to do the work. So looking forward to the conversation.
So I guess we have 4 questions for you tonight, and then we will open up the chat. Our students can raise their hand, and we will allow them to ask questions as well once we have completed those questions. So my first question is, what has your experience been like, not only as a woman, but as a woman of color in higher ed overall, and then in your positions at Gettysburg College? And whoever can start.
All right, Jen went first before. Okay, so I will jump in. So my experience overall, I think has been a good one. I've been in higher ed since the mid-90s. This is my 3rd institution. And I made the choice, some 25 years or so ago now to be in higher ed. So because I'm a social worker and currently see myself practicing as an administrator in higher education, but as a social worker, I could work in many different settings. And prior to coming into higher ed, I did that. Adoption and foster care, health clinics and hospital clinics, worked as a contractor for the Navy. So I worked in a lot of different settings as a social worker. But once I came into higher ed, I liked it enough, and I knew that early enough that I decided to make that my setting, my practice setting for the rest of my career. So, I wouldn't have stayed in it if I wasn't having a relatively, good experience. Here at Gettysburg College, I think, I would have to say, it's been the same. I mean, it's been you know, the ups and the downs that we go through, you know, on a regular basis. You know, you can't always do things that as quickly or as deeply as you might want. You know, there's a lot that depends on resources that are allocated. So there have been some challenges in that regard in terms of resources here. But I had a clear picture when I accepted the position of what the resources and staffing were going to be. So I felt that although it was not the ideal, that I could help to move the college along the course that we've all, you know, articulated we want to go in terms of becoming the most inclusive environment possible. And, you know, for the most part, you know, there was no bait and switch involved. I mean, I feel like what I learned in the interview process has in fact been what I have experienced here. And it has been a good, I think it's been a mutually good decision. So I'll stop there.
I will go ahead and go next, and only because like Jeanne, I was a social worker as well. And during my time as a social worker, I actually became an adjunct faculty member, instructor, excuse me, at a community college. And this really sparked my passion to somehow transition it into an environment where I can do significant good, especially long-term for students who may have challenges in terms of transitioning out of the foster care system and out of situations that may not actually be supportive of what their dreams might be. Higher education in general has been very good to me. I'm sorry about that. One of the things that I definitely want to do is real talk in that I know that throughout my educational experiences, particularly graduate level, my doctorate, I always experienced a significantly high amount of microaggression within the classroom, being the only a woman of color there. So I would hear comments like, I saw your people in the news last night, and what is wrong with your people? A lot of that during my experience when I was pursuing my doctorate, which was unfortunate. And I was always asked the question, why the clarifying question is, who is my people? You know, to get some understanding, you know, why the microaggressions had to persist. And when you went up the chain, and this is why I think I definitely wanted to be an administrator. When you went up to the chain, that type of behavior was readily dismissed. People made excuses for people who were unkind, whatever the motivation is, whether they were prejudiced, whether they misogynistic or racist, whatever it might be, there was an excuse made for that type of behavior. And one of the things that I was determined to do was to have a seat at the table. I was never taught that I suffered from imposter syndrome. Never had a problem with that because I had some very powerful women in my life, and they told me that I belonged, that I had a voice, and it was up to me to make informed decisions in order for me to have my voice heard. I just had to be strategic about that. So I'm extremely grateful for all of the experiences because I believe that they shaped my understanding of how I translate myself in different environments, but also pushed me to grow and evolve as a woman and as a woman of color or a brown woman. My experience here at Gettysburg College, I haven't been in my position very long. So it's only been, I'm in my 7th month. I will say that I have learned some really interesting lessons because I do think that when you see infrastructure, it teaches you something about what people actually value. And you know, my perspective is that I'm hoping to see more of things that are valued that will be considered in the minority, because I think that our voices are powerful, that we have our own agency, and we create a sense of innovation and creativity that would probably be absent if our voices or our presence were not here.
So I think those are both really good points. And my experience is completely different because I'm an academic. I don't have like a good purpose except for teaching. I'm a linguist by training. And my experience in higher ed, so I always knew that I was going to get a PhD. My father had 2. And so it never was a question about if I was going to get one or not. It just was what it was going to be in. And being a Black woman in linguistics is really interesting because there's hardly any of us. There are certain disciplines where there are more of us than others. Linguistics is not one of those. In higher education, one of the things that I have found that has been a great source of comfort to me, Monique, we can see you doing that. Oh, so one of the things has been a great source of comfort to me is that because my field is small, because there are very few Black women in linguistics, we are a really close group. I've enjoyed considerable and amazing mentorship from other Black women in linguistics, and I work really hard to mentor new Black women in linguistics. So that part's been great. I also feel that I have been really well supported. There are lots of fields where I think Black women are particularly restricted in terms of our scholarship, and I haven't found that to be the case, but it is also because I have sought out strong mentorship. And I think the takeaway probably from these talks tonight is going to be about mentorship and mentorship networks and sisterhood. Because one of the things that I've learned is that oftentimes you don't have a whole lot of other people to rely on in higher education than each other. And that's actually been true at Gettysburg College as well. I've been here, like I said, 19 years, and my most enduring friendships and sources of strength are in the very small Black community at Gettysburg College, the Black women and across the institution. Some of my closest friends since I got here, and some of them are in college life. But then my fellow faculty colleagues who are Black and brown also have been really, really important to me. I would not have stayed at this school if I didn't have people like Scott Hancock, McKinley Melton, Hakeem Williams, Sylvia Sante, Ruby Shai. It's impossible to exist alone in this kind of white space without those people. And as new people come, all I want to do is be that source of strength for them. It's really, I decided if I'm going to stay at Gettysburg College, that's what I'm going to do. And so I think we all really understand that burden when we are so few Black women in this kind of space. And I have plenty more to say about the trials and tribulations of fulfilling those roles as we go on.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue to our next question. So what are some of the obstacles you face, in higher ed related to not just your sex, but your race as well? And what resources have you utilized to overcome those obstacles?
I can go again because I think mine is actually pretty narrow. So as a linguist, there's some students on here, some alum on here who have been in my classes. The field of linguistics is very broad. The stuff that I do, I work on African American English. And when I was in graduate school, I was so we'll all talk about our first, but I was the first, and as far as I know, only Black woman to ever get a PhD out of the University of Buffalo Department of Linguistics. And none of my faculty ever said anything to me, but fellow graduate students, because I work on African American English, because I believe if you're a researcher of color, you have a responsibility to your own population. But I work on African American English, and fellow graduate students when we were coming up with our dissertation projects, for example, fellow graduate students would say to me, "Oh, how come you always get to work on the fun stuff?" And that is an academic microaggression that undermines the intellectual value of your work, and in turn undermines the value of who you are as a person if you are working on a topic that comes from your own community. So those are the kinds of things that I think that we see, particularly according to subject matter. And we know that women often suffer these kinds of prejudices with the work that we do. It is often less valued than the work that men do.
Oh, go ahead, Charmaine.
Oh, okay, that's fine. So one of the things that I would say that's definitely already in the research, there aren't a high number of women of color as administrators or senior administrators. And that's very telling for higher education in and of itself. I know that my mentors have been deliberately grooming me, for higher level positions in higher education, so that once again, the voice can be heard and impact can be made, and that there are people that can see themselves in me, right? So that has been very challenging because those ranks that are as established as they are very tight. And there was an article in the Harvard Business Review that talked about how challenging it can be for women of color, regardless of whether they're in higher education or in the corporate America, to get into the C-suite unless they have someone to advocate on their behalf. And it really should not be that difficult. Throughout my experience, I have worked with men of all colors that I would say, and not being judgmental, that were not as talented or as intelligent or as brilliant, and I'm not trying to be arrogant, as myself. And everyone knew it. However, for some reason, whatever the structures are, of course, I know people, they really did some real talk. They could speak to that. Whatever the infrastructures are that are in place, they of course are elevated for whatever reason it might be. And in talking about these things with my mentors, they really provided me with support in terms of, well, how do you negotiate those types of infrastructures in order for you to move forward and doors to open up for you without you compromising your integrity as a person. In other words, I don't have to be something I am not in order to be accommodating. And that's something in higher education that I think a lot of people, particularly women, brown women, I'm not going to speak for all of them, but for the ones that I talk to, can be very challenging because they feel like they have to change or be something else in order to accommodate or appease dominant perceptions of brown women. So that has been some of my challenges, but once again, a really supportive network of women and men, because I have some men in my support network that have really helped me to navigate things and process things in a way that's edifying. I'm not bitter, I'm not resentful, but they also encourage me in order to how to shape my talents and to connect with the right people.
I think for me, as an administrator in higher ed, I see a real difference between my earlier years of my career in higher ed when I was a director or an executive director. So that was one level of management, kind of middle management. And, at the institutions where I've been, that was seen as okay. That was an okay place for a Black woman or a woman of color to be. But if you aspire to get beyond that, to, the C-suite or, the president's cabinet, whatever it's called, that's a different matter. And so I made the decision about 15 years ago now that if I was going to get to that next level, I was going to have to, go back and get a terminal degree. That was never a lifelong, goal of mine. An MSW is a practicing degree, and it's a terminal degree if you're going to practice, in the community. So, but once I realized, I wanted to stay in higher ed, I knew that, I just couldn't get into certain conversations. Or if I did, I would be dismissed, or, somebody else would say the same thing, 10 minutes later, and somebody would hear it in a way, but I had already said it, but they didn't hear it. So, but that's a part of, what higher ed is. That's a part of the culture. And so once I went back to school and got the EDD, it was really amazing. I was still at Penn at that time, that, people who had been in meetings with me, who had, not heard me, not seen me, immediately upon receiving the degree, all of a sudden, they were willing to sit down and talk with me. It was just unbelievable to me. But that's higher ed, and especially at an Ivy League, that's higher ed. So anyway, but I did what I needed to do to get to that level. And at Penn, they had paid for my EDD, actually, which was wonderful. And without any obligation, no signing of papers or stay a certain amount of time. But really, once I finished, they didn't want to use any of the new learning, or, they weren't ready to move to the chief diversity officer concept. And so I ended up leaving there and spending a year, doing a job search. to get to the VP level. And it took about 8 searches to really find a place, and that ended up being in Michigan at Grand Valley State. But anyway, I think as I've been, of course, the only person of color in these settings, the biggest thing I've had to watch out for, and that people have tried with me, is a real subtle and not so subtle undermining of, you know, whatever it is that I'm proposing that we work on, you know, based on the literature, based on data and best practices. But there are people I've noticed around the table who believe they're the experts in diversity, even though they might have degrees in law or something else. And so I think they feel like their territory somehow is being, you know, stepped on. And who am I to come in as the newest person on the team and provide direction? So I've had to, in my own way, which is usually, you know, not outwardly confrontational. And I think people misinterpret that as being soft or, you know, unable to speak up. But I have a way that I like to handle things. And so I've had to take some folks behind closed doors to explain to them that I see what they're doing, that I didn't appreciate it. And I would not presume to tell them what was, you know, appropriate for their area. And so I'd appreciate it, you know, if they did not do the same with me ever again, you know, so that I wouldn't have to, you know, say it outside of the behind closed doors. And so, you know, I've had to do that, and it's worked, and they haven't done it again, you know, but I never raised my voice, and I was just very clear about what needed to happen. But so the undermining, I have to always keep my eye out for that, because it's rare that in my situation as the inaugural chief diversity officer at now 2 places, that people are going to confront you outwardly. But that doesn't mean they're not trying to, you know, undermine what you're doing. So that's been how I've handled it.
So the next question that I have for you all is one to kind of dig a little bit more into that. And the reason that we had this idea was because we have our first female woman of color vice president. And so we sat back and we thought, this is the year 2021, and we're still in the process of having first. What does that mean to you? How far we have come and how far we have yet to go, that we're still celebrating the first of anything? Bloomquist?
Well, so I've actually been thinking about this all day, because I just want to tell you guys right now, I have had a really long, tiring, rotten day. And one of the things I thought today is being the first, when you're a Black woman, being the first sucks. Maybe not if you're Kamala, because that's different, but otherwise, don't do it. It sucks. Being the first, there is no reward for you in being the first. And I'll say this because, you know, so being the first is important. Absolutely. Someone has to be first, right? But so if you think about the first, you know, and I'll just talk about myself. If you think about the first things, you know, that I have done at Gettysburg College. So I'm only the second Black woman who's ever been tenured at the college. You know, Deborah Barnes, who is wonderful, was the first. She got tenure. She left the next year. Charmaine's looking. Yeah, she left the next year after she got tenure. So I'm only the second one, but I'm the first Black woman to ever be a full professor. I am the first Black academic administrator at all at the college. You know, there's a couple other firsts, but when you're the first at a place, when you're the first Black person to do something at Gettysburg College, it does not get celebrated because it's shameful. I became the first first African-American full professor. And, you know, I said to Jeanne, don't you think that like maybe this college should say something about this? And I'm not trying to be like, oh, yay. But I'm like, don't you think they should say something? This is a huge achievement. And Jeanne had to go to communications and marketing and say something about it. You know, she had to advocate for me. And if it were something else, I think that, you know, this would be something that college would celebrate. And so being the first in some of these things, it's really, and it's, you know, one day I'll die and Gettysburg College isn't going to name a building after me, you know, oh, it's, you know, Jennifer Bloomquist building because she was the first. We still are trying to deny celebrating our first Black alum, you know, celebrating because it happened so late. and it's embarrassing. And to lift it up is impossible for the institution to save face. And so what that means is it then has repercussions for, you know, our ability to be celebrated. And it's also the case that when you're the first of something, you're open for all of these kinds of criticisms. There's all this expectation because you're the first. And if you don't fulfill all those expectations, then you have failed, even when you succeed amazingly. You know, we all know the expression, you know, all you got to do is stay black and die. And some days I just sit at my desk and I'm like, I just need to sit here and breathe air. And I have succeeded at Gettysburg College because I'm a Black woman sitting in Penn Hall breathing air. And that's really difficult. That's a difficult burden to bear, to be the first at something. And I would like to celebrate. You know, I'm very proud of myself. I am very proud of my sisters who are on this call. But the problem is being first means that there are too few of us.
Jeanne, you mind if I go ahead and pitch hit right here?
Go.
All right, thank you. So first of all, Jennifer, thank you. I love the first because they help pave the way. And so I definitely honor every first anywhere, you know, because I do think that there's value in what they do for those that come up behind them or even near on the side of them, okay? You know, from my perspective, I do think that there are challenges because you are looked at in a way in terms of expectations, and not everyone is actually rooting for you. Let's just let's put it out there. Some people want to see you fall, want to see you make mistakes, want to have that judgment against you, and you would say, "Oh, well, that's human nature." I would say that there's just a little extra for brown people, for brown women. Oh, I knew she was going to talk loud. Okay, well, you know what? When you're in your home, I know that you elevate your voice as well. You know, so it's like they're looking for things that justify or reinforce some of the things that they already preconceived notions about women of color. And so, you know, it is my hope that in my role and my responsibilities, that one, I stand in the integrity of who I am, but also help demystify, you know, what it means to be the first and to actually stand in that in my honor. And I'll say glory because I believe I'm a queen in all this, but really show the evidence of what it really means to be who I am in terms of being deliberate, intelligent. I don't deny anything, okay, about who I am. And I think I just had some really great people who were the first in their role. Dr. Belle Whelan, she is the president of the Southern Association, akin to our middle states. And she's one of my mentors, a brilliant woman, the first in many things. And but to have someone like that in my life to help me elevate my game, I love it because now I have a standard to measure, okay, this is where I need to be in terms of what they did in terms of paving the road. So I'm humbled by it, I'm honored by it, and I'm hoping that I am reflecting the best of all firsts in some small way.
Yeah, and you know, as I think about being the first in, you know, multiple situations, as you all have talked about, you know, there's, as you said, there's some hard days that go along with that, whether it's, you know, increased expectations or, you know, subtle, like undermining, like I said, it's difficult sometimes, but I do, you know, I look to role models as well. One of mine in higher ed, I really look to is Ruth Simmons. As many of you probably know, she's 76 years young right now and on her third presidency, you know, African-American woman. First at Smith College, then at Brown University, and now at Prairie View A&M. And I had the good fortune of hearing her at a conference, a virtual conference in January. And, you know, she was relating a story about dealing with a particular trustee, white male, who was, you know, had made an appointment with her to ask her to do something that was really exclusionary. One day, you know, had some ideas about how to keep certain students out, you know, or whatever. It wasn't Black students, but it was other students. And, you know, she said, you know, in her mind, she said to herself, you know, does he not know who I am? You know, that's what she was saying in her head. You know, why would I ever participate, you know, in something that like he's suggesting? And so she finally she sat there for a minute and then she just said to him, no, I would not be a part of doing anything like that. Now, this is a big trustee, big donor. And he was kind of taken aback, but stayed for a conversation. And, some years later, they're great colleagues because she remained herself and true to who she is, in every situation. So I think Charmaine or both of you may have alluded to that. So I really look to those kind of role models in higher ed, but I've always felt, even if it wasn't a female role model, I've always felt like I belonged in higher ed. And part of that is my personal history. And then my dad was the first Black tenured professor at the School of Social Work at University of Penn back in the 70s. So I kind of grew up on the campus, and I, thought I was supposed to be there. And so I had that, but I also, have great uncles who were college graduates. And, so on the days that are hardest for me, I think about, in the 2000s, if I'm having a hard day, I think back about what they must have been going through as students in the 1940s at a traditionally white institution. And then I kind of pick myself up and say, well, I think I could probably deal with what's going on here, even though it's difficult. So I, even if it's not a female, I try to look back on my history, but I will look forward to a time when we're not saying this, I'm the first all the time. I really look forward to the time. I know when I was at Grand Valley and I helped to start a scholarship there, one of the things I said in my remarks was, I'll be so glad when more people who look like me, brown and Black people, can say they're third and fourth generation college, not first generation. Not that there's anything wrong with first generation, but we shouldn't be excluded from saying that, and having that experience in our families. And so that's what I look forward to. I feel like I'm on the shoulders of a whole lot of people. And unfortunately, they were like all males pretty much in my family that were in college and graduating in the 1940s. There was like one female who got to go. All the other women had to stay home, kind of thing, because that was the times. But yeah, I look forward. I'm fourth generation, and I want, some company. I want other people to say they're third and fourth and fifth generation. And so, yeah, I look forward to the time when there's a few less firsts.
So one last question before we open it to the larger group. There are a number of Black and Brown alumni and current students that are participating in the conversation this evening. What insights could you give them as they forjoin into graduate work, finding their career, those that are in their career and wanting to move up? What insights can you share with them that are kind of affirming of their identities and moving them forward in their career?
I'll go first this time. So one of the things that I think one of my mentors told me, Dr. Nuria Cuevas, she's a vice president at an organization in Georgia. She always reminded me, because she was also my supervisor during my doctoral internship at her institution. And at that time, she reminded me to don't ever despise the process, because there are things that you can experience. You either want to get ahead much quicker than you should possibly, or there's some level of trepidation in terms of not moving too fast. Or you experience things that could really make you feel angry or upset, bitter, resentful, in terms of microaggressions, or, that glass ceiling, or whatever it might be, or people being elevated and knowing that, you could run circles around them, or being the first, like Jennifer so eloquently communicated. She says, don't despise the process, because everything helps create who you are becoming. And for me, she says, so for some things for you, it's what you're unbecoming. And when she meant unbecoming is that you're unraveling all these things that you think you have to be in order to please other people. So doors to open for you as a woman, a brown woman. And I really appreciated her frankness, because then I felt like I can actually walk in the realness of who I was, stand in that, because she was reflecting that to me as a brown woman. So don't despise the process. Lean into it, really lean into it, embrace it, learn from it. And then of course, when you are liberated or free, I think Toni Morrison says that the function of freedom is so that you can free someone else, right? So when you are free in your mind and in your thinking and in your feelings about who you are and what you represent, and regardless of what field you go into, your function, your purpose is then to help free others through what you represent, what you model, what you say, what you write. And that's pretty much what I would encourage those who are listening tonight.
I guess my advice would be keep in mind, or keep an open mind about the fact that that person who may be your best advocate or champion or mentor at any one time may not look like you. And that was my experience, in terms of trying to move into administration. This was before I was in higher ed. I was, working in a community agency. But the person who gave me my first opportunity to be a manager, with very limited experience, was a white female. And she, I got turned down for a job that was, kind of a senior manager job, over 25 people. And when she called to tell me I didn't get the job, I said, well, this is like a catch-22. If I'm going to move into administration, but I have to have experience to move into administration, how am I ever going to be an administrator? And she, she heard me. And about 6 months later, she called me back and said they had a different position open that was only supervising 4 people at the time. And they were social workers. I mean, I had a direct, knowledge of that. And she said, I just couldn't get over. She said, no one has ever said to me, what you said on the phone about that whole catch-22. She said, and I really thought about it. And so, yeah, are you interested in this job? So I took that job. And 6 months after that, she ended up promoting me to the original job when the person who had it on paper, the management experience, didn't really have any people skills and, had to move on from the job. So, and that whole first year I was in that job, she took me under her wing and she really taught me how to be a manager, like management 101, walking around, talking to your people, all that. And as a social worker, all I had was like a half semester course in supervision. I didn't have any management, courses. And so I would never have imagined that's how it was going to be, but you just never know. So you have to pay attention, kind of put it out there, what you're looking for, and you'd be surprised maybe who steps up to help you along the way.
So I agree with both Charmaine and Jeanne. So I think that it's really important to find your allies and your mentors. And like Jeanne said, they won't always look like you. You should build networks of people who are like you. Because oftentimes when you need a soft place to fall, that's where you're going to do it. But it's also the case that if you are the first at something, then you can't find somebody. You're a unicorn, yay! And so you can't find somebody like you. And so you need to be able to leverage support networks that maybe established white men or women or whatever. So don't be afraid to tap into those sources of advancement as well. I also think that it's really, really important to know what your priorities are. I think that a lot of what Charmaine has been saying tonight is stand in your truth, be true to yourself. And I think that really is about your priorities. And it doesn't mean that, some people's priorities are, I want to make a lot of money. There's nothing wrong with that. Some people's priorities are, I want to have a family and build a home. There's nothing wrong with that either. Your priorities are about you and reflect your values. And I think that's really important as you go through your career. I recently had a big birthday. I recently turned 50. So I think about a lot of these things. And so, looking back, 50-year-old Jeanne Bloomquist would have said to 25-year-old Jeanne Bloomquist some very important things. And I think that, that knowing your priorities, staying true to your values is really important. And then I also think that it's really, really important to maintain perspective. And I love linguistics. I love teaching. I love my job at Gettysburg College. When I had my first child, which some of you will be surprised, you knew him when he was a baby. He just turned 21. I know. When I had him, I said to myself, oh my God, all of this is just a job. And that gave me the most amazing perspective. And again, ties back to my values. And it doesn't mean you have to have a baby. Not saying that. But oftentimes these life events, losing my father was devastating for me, and also reminded me, some of this minor petty nonsense that goes on every day because I'm a woman of color in this job, it's nothing You know, these life events really teach you important lessons. So maintain your perspective. And also the last thing I will tell every single one of you, know when to walk. When you are in a job where you just cannot, know when to leave it, know when to walk. That is the most important thing that I could tell anybody. And if you are telling somebody you're going to walk and they say, okay, walk, then you better be ready to walk because you can't walk that stuff back. So those are my pieces of advice.
So we're going to now open the floor. You can unmute yourself and ask the group a question. You can write it in the chat and we'll share it. But I do want to give our guests some time to ask the panel questions directly.
Hello, everyone. Elizabeth Ekman, Chaplain of Religious and Spiritual Life. Thank you so much for sharing your experiences with all of us. So glad that we could tune in and benefit from your knowledge and wisdom. The question I have is, maybe one of you could share a time that you have shared an injustice that you experienced to a colleague. And since you all are first in your field, your colleague and how they responded to it. And if it was a negative response, how did you then try to continue to make change and speak to them and help them to understand why this was important to you and why it should matter?
I don't mind going.
Wait, I was gonna say, this is not a good one for me because I just blow stuff up and it doesn't work well.
Okay. So one of the things that I did, and I'm going to go back to when I was earning my doctorate, at that time, my dissertation chair, that person is a critical person in terms of opening the doors so I can earn my degree. Regrettably, he seemed to have some challenges with brown people, although his work dealt with brown people. And he would say things that were extremely insensitive and very challenging for me. And when I went to the dean of the School of Education at that particular time and communicated my concerns, and I spoke about this earlier, he just said, you know what, don't worry about it. Sometimes when people are doing the research in that area, they may become desensitized. Once again, just making excuses for the behavior. What I did, I didn't try to convince this man otherwise or tough it out. I submitted a formal request to have my chair changed because emotionally and psychologically, it was unhealthy. It was very toxic for me. And so instead of toughing it out and trying to educate a man whose research is about brown people, which is what was really crazy for me. I was really suffering from what they call, cognitive dissonance. I'm like, what is going on here? Because you have no love for brown people, I can tell. So I'm not sure why you did the research in that particular area, but I just left. When I say left, I took myself out of a very bad situation, advocated appropriately. I didn't make a stink about it, or I didn't burn down, any buildings. I was professional, and I communicated my concerns, and I moved on. And it was funny because I graduated the same time as his prize pupil did, and he was actually shocked to see me actually having to earn my degree at the same time his favorite was earning his degree. And it was a beautiful thing because I felt like I was vindicated in my experience, that I don't need you to open any doors for me. I'm good because I can really earn my degree on my own and not be abused in the process.
Thank you, Charmaine. I want to get to, Jeanne, did you have a comment?
Oh, no. Mm-mm.
Varsha Russell from the class of 2006 said, first, thank you all for your insight. What experience do you think has best shaped you for being the first?
So that's what I was thinking about when I was unmuted myself. So I was getting ahead of the process. For me, I know it was the experiences that began when I was in about the 4th grade, when my parents moved us out of Philadelphia from a very urban, primarily Black neighborhood to the suburbs. They wanted to have a better school district, and school system didn't believe in private schools, so they wanted to be in a place where we could be sent to the public school. And so we were the first in our neighborhood, the first Black family. My brother and I in 2nd and 4th grade were the only Black kids in the school. As you can imagine, we were not too happy with our parents, around that time, because it was really a struggle, to have people, our neighbors, literally would run back inside their house if we came outside at the same time. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. So very early, I had to get tuned into what it meant to be the first. And so, but then, so then I went on, and of course the high school there was primarily, white. And, I graduated in a class of 500, one of 7 Black students. So by the time I got to Penn State, where there were thousands and thousands of people, main campus, and we had maybe a few hundred people of color, I was good. That was like the best experience I could have ever had. I thought that was like thousands of people, even though it was only a few hundred people. There was real community. There was a real sense of community there. But I really think it was the having to go through schools that were primarily white, and Penn State. So by the time I got to the work world, a graduate school of the work world, it was like just the norm. So I'd already, navigated those situations because my dad was a social worker. I had a built-in live-in, counselor, advisor, and to help me understand what I was seeing and what I was experiencing, and and could explain racism to me, at a very young age, and how it's institutionalized and all of that. So I just had a real advantage, I think, by virtue of that upbringing.
Our next question comes from Hannah B. How can white women be better allies to women of color in higher ed or corporate America? Thank you, Hannah, for your question.
I see Charmaine and Jeanne just like, okay, it's your turn. I see. see. So, I think this is a really, it can be a really fraught question, and the answer can be very hard, because I think it's often different for different people. I have plenty of white women allies at Gettysburg College. Some of them, Janelle Wertzberger, I see you on this call. And, these are people who I've known for years and years. It's difficult to just step in and be like, hi, nice to meet you, I'm your ally. Usually people who are non-majority identified really wait for majority people to prove themselves. And I'm going to say it's deeds, not words. The people who I count as, white women who I count as my allies are white women who have stood by me and have supported me and have shown time and time again that they are not afraid of standing up. And it's not, the internet activists. It's not the I did blackout for Instagram kind of thing. It's people who in their everyday lives, when I first came to the college, there was a woman on the faculty, a white woman on the faculty, who made this huge deal out of having lunch with every new faculty member. And by the time I was in my 5th year at the college, she had still not had lunch with me. And she was somebody who really saw herself as this diversity advocate and da-da-da-da-da. And, I said to her one day, I was like, you never reached out to me. You never invited me anywhere. You never had lunch with me. You never even, had anything to say at a faculty meeting or anything like that. Yet, if you looked on social media, she was this big diversity champion. She was teaching critical race theory in her classes to white kids. And I just didn't feel that she was authentic. It was all window dressing. And so I think that it's hard work and it's putting in the time, and it's showing up for stuff. And it's not looking to get credit. And it's also not feeling some kind of way if people aren't falling all over themselves to thank you for it and appreciate you for it and tell you how great you are that you stood up for a Black person, a brown person, an Asian person, a gay person. It's just doing these things just to do them because you believe in them. And so that's what I would say. And Charmaine and Jeanne may have more to add, but it's putting in the time, it's showing up, it's doing the work.
I think part of it, and I want to interject here because I'm constantly having this conversation with people. I think we get so hung up on the theories and the practice and this very high level stuff. And we don't ask ourselves, when's the last time you did life with someone different than you? So if you can't get to I had a conversation, I had lunch, I spent time with someone that does not have the same background as me, went to the same schools, has the same understanding of life as me, then to get to this place where you're an ally, that's a large leap. Like, that's a huge jump. And so I encourage students all the time that if this is what you want to do and you want to be seen as this person, then you need to do life with people that are different than you. So if you want to study abroad, great, please study abroad. But why go to Bath? Like, the person in Bath looks just like you and has the same phenotype as you. So why don't you put yourself in a place, in an understanding, in a culture that is different? We have to get back to the basics of what this is before we get to this high level unpacking of social justice and pedagogy, because that's heavy. That's a lot of heavy lifting. It's a lot of big words and it's not easily accessible. And that's why we start breaking up like, oh, educated and college educated. No, little kids do it every day at the park, at the playground. Oh, I got on the swing. I pushed this new friend. And I think we have to get to something that basic so that if I am sitting around with you and we're having coffee, then I can unpack with you my feelings as a Black woman in higher ed and how I've been hurt. And I still got to wake up and go to work every day because at the end of the day, my son likes to eat. And my son not eating isn't an option. And the things that people do at times could potentially impact that. And so if you can sit with me in that and understand it, then we can get to a place where allyship is happening. And I think making it simple and tangible like that will then get us to the place where there's this greater understanding where you don't have to use your tears and this victimization of like, oh, but I feel like it's so wrong what my people have done. Yes, we know that. Let's move past it. Let's get to the real work of serving and helping each other so that we can move not just forward as a people, but as women, as Black and brown women, and then the greater good. So I do step back from the panel. Are there any other questions?
The only thing I'll add to what Jennifer and Monique said, and is yay and amen, it really is about trust. And developing trust takes time. Developing relationship with the foundation of trust takes time and energy and sincerity in action, in words, in all that. And so trust is very the cornerstone of being an ally or becoming an ally.
I think that's right. And both of you alluded to this, but it's really about white women who are willing to get in there, roll up their sleeves, do the work, but not be the leaders. Have the women of color be the leaders of whatever it is that they're working on, or the people of color to be the leaders, and you're in the follower group, and that helps to build trust and what have you. And then you can move from I like this word, I don't know how new it is, but people are using now more. So allyship is the first level, and then being an accomplice is the second level. I mean, you're really in there. You're really understanding. You're really side by side, shoulder to shoulder. So, I say allyship is now, level 1, or foundational, but you really want to try to get to, if you're serious, the level of being an accomplice.
So I do want to be cognizant of everyone's time. I want to thank you ladies for joining us this evening as we continue on in our Women's History Month for your time and your insight and your knowledge. So thank you.